All right, welcome back, guys. So in this video, we're going to see how we can retrieve our user. So the way this is going to work is on our Next.js client, we're going to make a request, and this is going to be to our Next.js API, and then that API is going to parse our access token, and then that way we can put it inside of an authorization header, send the request to our Django Backend API, which is then going to give us our user, and then we can pass that user onto our client. So we're going to see how to accomplish that in this video. So currently, if I open up my terminal, I have my front end running as well as my back end, so make sure you do the same. And then I'm just going to close that up and have it running in the background. And before I actually get into all of this logic with retrieving our user, I just want to make a couple tweaks. So for instance, right now, this homepage, and I suppose every page, is hugging this navbar very closely. So that's one thing I want to change. Also changing this to not say navbar, but instead be something else might be better. And also if I go in the login, I forgot to change this right over here, which is our title. So those are some little tweaks I'm going to quickly make, and then we're going to move on to seeing this logic with how to retrieve our user. So back into my application, I'm going to go into my source higher order components layout, and then with this right here, which is our div that's wrapping our children, which is our pages, I want to add a little bit of margin to the top just to make these pages look a little bit better. So that's the first tweak. And then the next tweak I'm going to make is in this component's navbar. And then I'm just going to find where I have that navbar text. And I'm just going to change to something like httpOnly auth. I think that would look a little bit better. And then my next tweak is going to be inside of my pages login. And then I'm just going to find where I have that layout tag, which is right over here. And then change this from register to be login. So those are some little tweaks. Let's see how that looks now. So now we have the proper title here. And then all these pages have the proper title. And also this isn't hugging the top very closely. And then we have this saying httpOnly auth. So I'm liking where this is at right now. And then just one final little tweak, which isn't too important, but I just want to make it, is inside of my actions auth. When I did my request to register an account, the URL right here, I started it off with a slash, but I wasn't doing that for the other action creators. Now this will still work if you don't have the slash, but I just like to be consistent. So that's another little tweak I'm just going to quickly do. So right over here, I'm going to put a slash, and then same thing right over here. So there we go. That way I'm just a little bit more consistent with these requests. And now with these tiny tweaks out of the way, let's start implementing our logic for getting our user. So I'm going to close all of this stuff up. And then the place where I want to work is inside of this API account. And I want to make a brand new file. And then this file I'm going to call user.js. So that way when we hit API/account/user, we're going to hit this endpoint here. So let's go ahead and implement this logic. So first off, I'm going to need cookie, which is coming from cookie. And I'm going to be using this so that I can parse the cookie value. And then I also want to bring in that API URL. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be making a request to my Django Backend API to retrieve my user. And then the request for that, we can take a look, is API/account/ and then user. So that's what's going to retrieve our user. And then this in particular is going to be a GET request. So I can close these up. And then here the path for this is going to be up 3 directories and then config index. All right, so now let's export default async request response. And then here I'm going to check if the request.method is get. So if request.method is equal to get, then we're going to continue with the request. Otherwise, we're going to return an error response. So first I'm going to set the response header, and I'm going to set allow. And then what I want to allow here is get requests, and then I'm going to return a response with a status of 405, just like we've been doing before. And I'm going to pass back some JSON. That's going to have an error. And then this error, just like always, we're going to have our backticks, and it's going to say method request.method not allowed. So that's going to be in the case where this isn't a GET request. Now, if it is a GET request, the next thing we're going to do is parse our cookie values. So the way we can do that is I'm going to make a constant called cookies, which I'm going to set equal to cookie.parse. And then I'm going to parse request.headers.cookie. So just like this. Now this right here, if you don't have any cookies in your browser, then this right here is going to be undefined. And we can even confirm this. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to return a response with a status of 200, passing back some JSON, That's just going to say success. And I'm going to save that. And then inside of my dashboard, I'm just going to make a request to this endpoint. So inside of my dashboard, I'm going to add some logic. And then I'm going to add a use effect hook. And this is going to come from React. And then this use effect hook, all it's going to do is make a request to that endpoint we just made. So we can do that with our fetch API. So I can do await fetch. And then we have to make this asynchronous. And then our endpoint, our endpoint's going to be /API/account/user. And then we can pass in some options with our method, which is going to be get. And I can just put some headers where I have an accept header. And that's going to be application JSON. So this way we can just make this request and see what happens. So I'm going to open up my terminal. And because I made some changes inside of my Backend API for Next.js, I need to rerun my server in order for those changes to apply. And then I'm going to navigate to my application. I'm going to open up my console, go into application, and then here I have the cookies. So currently I have no cookies. I cleared all of them just so I can do this test. And then if I go to /dashboard, then we're going to make that request. And then we can see what happens. So if I take a look here, argument string must be a string. So we got a type error. And that is because this right here ended up failing. So let's now comment this out. And let's do some console.logs. So first I want to console.log request.headers.cookie. So let's take a look at what happens here. So I'm going to rerun my server, go back to my application, refresh, and let's see what happens. So there we are. It's undefined. And that is because we have no cookies. So now let's see what happens when we do have cookies. So right now we do have login functionality, so we can actually test that out. If I log in with my account, all right, so here we are. We have the access and refresh tokens as cookies. So now if I go back to my application, what we ended up sending back was this right here. Because what happened was we got rerouted to our dashboard. So we made that request to this endpoint. And then we console.logged, and we see the console.log in here because this is our backend API. So we don't see this console.log in our browser, but instead we see it in the terminal. So I see the value of access, and I see the value of refresh, and these are values that I can extract. So now that we have a better understanding of how this works, now I can get rid of this console.log. I'm going to uncomment this. And then what I'm going to do here is a syntax we saw previously when I was creating the store. So we can put these two question marks, and then I'm just going to have an empty string like so. So what this means is that if this isn't null or undefined, then we're going to parse this right here. If it is null or undefined, then instead we're going to parse this. So now the question is, what happens if you parse an empty string? So let's test that out. So I'm going to console.log, and then I'm going to do a cookie.parse, and I'm going to do it on an empty string, just so that we can take a look at what actually happens if you do this. And then we know what values we're working with. So I'm going to save. So I made changes here, so I'm going to rerun my server. I'm going to go back to my application, and then I'm going to refresh just to make sure we make this request, go back to my server, and here we are. We get an empty object like so. So what this means now is that when we run this right here, if we have cookies in our header, we're either going to parse those cookies and have access to the access and refresh token, or we're just going to get an empty object back. So that's going to be the value of this cookies. So I can remove this console.log now that we understand that. So the next thing I'm going to do is get that access token because I need that access token in order to pass it in the authorization header. So I'm going to make another constant, which I call access. That's going to be my access token, which I grab from cookies.access. Now, cookies.access, this right here is going to be undefined if what we end up doing with the cookie.parse is parsing the empty string. So what I can do once again is just have two question marks like so, and then have a value like, let's say, false. So that way access is either going to be the access token, or it's going to be false, and then I can do a check where if access is false, then in that case we can return something like a 401 unauthorized. And then just to confirm that cookies.access, that this would be undefined, let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if I do a console.log on cookies.access, and then I save this, then I'm going to restart, and then back in my application, I'm going to log out just so that we don't have these values. And actually here we don't see the logout button because we didn't implement functionality yet to check whether we're authenticated. So that's something that we're going to be doing in our next video. So for now, what I'm going to do is just delete these 2 cookies. So I can right-click, delete, right-click, delete, and that's going to be our way of logging out for now. So I'm going to refresh, and let's see what happened. So here we are. We get undefined. So previously we saw the access token before I cleared the cookies, and now we get undefined from this console.log. So now we know that this right here would be undefined if it doesn't exist. So instead this access is going to be false. So now again, we know what data we're working with. So I'm going to get rid of this console.log, and let's continue on. So the next thing I'm going to do is an if check, and I'm going to check if access is equal to false. If that's the case, I'm just going to return a response with a status of 401, and then pass back some JSON, and it's just going to have an error. And then this error is going to say user unauthorized to make this request. And then if this right here doesn't result in true, which means we have an access token, then we're going to continue and make the actual request. So I'm going to have my try catch. And then here, I'm going to do my const API response, which is going to be await fetch. I'm going to have my backticks where I bring in my API URL. And then our endpoint, like we saw a little bit earlier, is API account user. So it's going to be localhost 8000 / API account user, which is going to hit our Django Backend API. This is going to be a GET request. So I'm going to have my method as GET. And then I'm going to have my headers. And then here, I'm going to have an accept header, which is going to be application JSON. And then to get our user, this is our authorized request. So I'm also going to have my authorization header, where we're going to have bearer, and then our access token. And there we are. This is how we can make an authorized request from our Next.js API. Then the next thing I want to do is get that data, which is going to be our user data. So I'm going to do const data is await API response.json, and then I'm going to check, was this successful? So I'm going to do an if API response.status is 200. We know this was successful. Otherwise, we know it wasn't successful. So in the case where it is successful, I'm just going to cut this just so I don't have to retype a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to paste that right over here. And then what we're going to return is a response.status of 200 to mirror our Django Backend API. And instead of this success, we're going to actually pass the user himself. So I'm going to have user, and then data.user is how we grab that user. And then just to refresh your memory, inside of our account views, we can go down to that load user view. And then when this is successful, then we can extract this user from our data. So I can close that back up. And I'm also going to close up this terminal just to have a little more space here. And then inside of this else, we're going to return a response.status, which is going to mirror whatever the Django Backend API sent back. So I'm going to have API response.status, pass back some JSON. And in this case, we're going to have an error. And then in this case, we don't have to have it like so with the custom message because we will have an error object because this is an API endpoint that we made. So I can do data.error. And that's how I can grab the error. And then I could copy this, put it inside of the catch. And in this case, we will have a custom message. And it's just going to say something went wrong when retrieving user. And then I'm going to pass a hard-coded status of 500 here and save that. And this is our complete endpoint now for Next.js. So the next thing we have to do is go into our auth file inside of our actions folder and our types and start working on our action creator, which is going to hit this endpoint. So I'm going to open up my types and auth, and then I'm going to go into my types here and add 2 new dispatch types. So right below my logout fail, I'm going to do an export const load user success. I'm going to copy this, place it between here, copy down a line, and then change the success part to be fail. So that way I have a load user success and a load user fail. So I'm going to save that, then close that up, go inside of my auth.js file, go to the top and bring these 2 dispatch types in here. So my load user success, my load user fail. And then right at the top here, I'm going to define this action creator. So export const load user. It's going to take no parameters, and then it's going to be an async dispatch. And then I'm going to have my try catch. And then inside of the try part, I'm going to have const response as await, fetch. I'm going to have /API/account/user. That's going to hit my Next.js API because we have API account and then user. I'm going to pass some options. where I have the method, which is going to be get, because that's what we defined it to be. Going to have my headers, where all I'm going to have is my accept header. It's going to be application JSON, and that's going to be my user data. So then we grab that user data from our Django Backend API through this authorized request, and then we pass that data further down onto our Next.js client right here. And then also put 2 arrows here by accident, so I'm going to delete that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just grab that data that was passed back with await response.json, and then I'm going to check if my response.status is 200. In that case, this was successful, and we're going to dispatch our success case. And then here I'm going to have my else, where if we don't get a 200, that means this did not succeed. So I'm going to dispatch my type, which is going to be load user success. And here I'm going to have a payload that I pass back, which is going to be that user. So I'm just going to pass back the data itself, and then we're going to grab that user from the data inside of our reducer. And then I'm going to copy this, put it right in here. We're not going to have a payload if we fail. And this is going to be the dispatch fail case. And I'm going to have the same thing inside of my catch. So I'm going to save that. And this is our complete action creator here for getting our user. So the next thing I'm going to do now is go inside of my reducers and then auth.js, bring in those 2 dispatch types. So we have the load user success and load user fail. And then let's handle these dispatch cases. So I'm going to find my logout fail. And then right below that, I'm going to do my case for load user success. Then here I'm going to return spread operator on state. And then the value that I want to adjust is my user. So I'm going to adjust the user, and that's going to be payload.user, because we're passing back the data, and I'm going to extract the user from that data. Then I'm going to handle the fail case. So load user fail. This is going to return spread operator on state. And then if we fail to load our user, I'm going to set user to be null. And then I'm also going to adjust some of these other dispatch types as well, because now we're dealing with this user. So first I'm going to go to the logout success, and instead of just setting is authenticated to be false, I'm also going to set the user to be null, and then everything else should be fine. So that's the only tweak I'm going to make here. So now we're all good with our action creator and our reducer. So now the very last thing we're going to be doing is going into our dashboard and then getting that user. So the tweaks that I want to make in my dashboard are accessing that Redux piece of state, which is our user, and then displaying their first name in this dashboard. And then another thing I want to do is just make this an authorized route. That way, if you're not logged in, then you get redirected to the login page. So those are the tweaks we're going to make. So in order to do redirects, we need to bring in use router here. So that's one thing I'm going to bring, which is going to come from next router. And then another thing I'm going to bring in is my use selector. That way I can bring in that user piece of Redux state. So there we are. I'm going to remove this use effect hook because we're not going to be doing this anymore. And then I'm going to do const router is use router. That way I have access to that in here. And then I'm going to do const is authenticated, which is use selector. And that's coming from state, arrow function, state.auth.is authenticated. And then another piece of Redux state I need is that user. So I'm going to copy down a line, select this part, Command D, change this to be user. So user is going to be coming from state.auth.user. That's how we extract that data. So now we have access to it inside of our component here. So let's now make this dashboard look a little better. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to have a div. That's going to have a class name. And it's going to have some padding. So I'm going to have p-5 to have padding all around, background light, and then rounded -3. That way we have something that looks like a Jumbotron. And then in here I'm going to have another div with a class name of container fluid. And then py-3. So just like we have in our home page. And then I'm going to have my h1 with a class name of display-5. And then font weight of bold. And then I'm going to have the text of user dashboard. And then below this h1, I'm going to have a paragraph with a class name, which is going to be font size -4. And then some margin at the top. And this is going to say, welcome user to the httpOnly auth tutorial site. And then this user is going to be the user's first name. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to bring in some logic. And then if we take a look at our Redux state, this user is going to be null when we don't have the user. So one thing I can do is check if user doesn't equal null. Then I can grab the user.firstName. And then we're going to display it right here. So I'm going to save that. And then another thing I want to do is inside of here. I'm going to have an if check for is authenticated. And then if we're not authenticated, then I'm going to redirect with router.push. And we're going to redirect to the login page. So that's where we're going to have this protection. And then just like before, I need to make sure that this router exists. So I can check if type of window doesn't equal undefined and not authenticated. And then another check that I can add in here is also just make sure that we're not loading. So I can bring in my loading piece of Redux state. So that's going to be coming from my useSelector, then state arrow function, state.auth.loading. And then I can check, is this also not loading? Then in that case, we're going to do this push. And I also don't need to have these curly braces. So I can remove those, and I can have this protection like this. So that's going to be my complete dashboard. Also, I'm noticing this is grayed out, so I can remove this. Save, and then the last thing we have to do is actually retrieve our user. So the way I'm going to do that is when I log in, I'm going to dispatch this load user. That way we can update our Redux state to have the user be the user data. So I'm going to find my login, and then when we're successful with our login, then I'm going to dispatch my load user. So maybe first I'll do the login success dispatch, then I'll dispatch my load user. So there we are. Now the last step is just to test this out. So I can go back into my application now. Actually, one thing I'm going to do is just in case, I'm going to open my terminal and rerun my Next.js here. Go back to my application. And first, let's try to go to our /dashboard. Make sure that our protection is working. So there we are. We're rerouted to the login page. Currently, we have nothing in our cookies. And then let's also check out our Redux state. So currently, our user is null, is authenticated as false, loading's false, and register success is false. Now let's log in. And then I put in the wrong password, so let's try that again. There we are. So I have my refresh and access token now inside of my cookies, and they're both HTTP-only cookies. And let's take a look at my Redux state. So here we are. I have the user now with the first name John, last name Doe, and the username. I have the is authenticated as true. And then here we also have our user dashboard, and we have welcome John to the HTTP-only auth site. So here we're displaying the user's first name. So we've now successfully managed to make a request to our Next.js API, which then parsed our access token, passed it along in an authorization header to our Django Backend API, which then passed back our user data to our Next.js API, which then further passed that data down to our Next.js client so that we can show our user. And then we can also go back here and check out our Python terminal, and then we can even see our request here, which is our authorized GET request to API/account/user was a 200 OK. So our authorized request was successful. So there we are. Now we've accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish in this video. So we've managed to make our authorized request. We saw to parse that cookie and do our flow that we saw in part 2 of the series. And now our next step is going to be to make sure that we remain logged in on page refreshes. So in order to accomplish that, we can use that verify route with the simple JWT package. And that's going to let us verify whether our access token is still valid. And then we can update our Redux states appropriately. And also, because right now if I do a page refresh, what's going to happen is I'm on the login page. Then I can check out my Redux state. And then I also see right here, my user's null, my is authenticated is false, loading's false, and register success is false as well. But anyway, that's going to be everything for this video here. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It goes a long way to help a channel like mine grow and get recognized so others can benefit from the videos I release as well. Also, I have links in the description that you can check out. I have one for an e-commerce course that you can check out if you're interested in learning to develop an application like that. I also have a link for joining my Web Development Kings Facebook group. That way, if you want to personally ask me something, then you can go right ahead and do that, and I will happily help you out. Doesn't cost you anything, so if you're scratching your head about something, then you can go right ahead and ask me to help you out. Only questions I probably won't answer are if you want me to help you build some kind of personal project, as I don't quite have the time for that sort of thing. You can also post something in the group itself. That way, other developers in the group can help you out with something as well. The group is all about growing your expertise as a developer, so if you're interested in that, then go right ahead, click that link in the description, and join the family. Also, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notification bells, that way you don't miss out when I release a new video, and I'll see you in the next one.